Hello everybody, welcome back. My name is Daniel Gormali. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Um, so today I wanted to look at a game between Billy Fellows and Jonathan Underwood. So the reason I showed this, let me explain the story behind it. I played in the Dorset Congress, which is the Grand Congress. So there's £1,000 prize. It's quite a big prize, right? In each section. But Dorset isn't easy to get to, so it's quite expensive to play in the tournament for a lot of people. So even though the prize money is quite good, it probably cost me about 450 in basic expenses. Once you add food, so I was eating out a lot. Okay, that's expense you don't necessarily need. You could just go to the supermarket. And probably spend £10 a day on food if you were careful. But obviously it's expensive, basic expenses 450. So it's a gamble going down there. It paid off because I won the tournament. But it's a long trek. And on the way back from Dorset, obviously stopped off in King's Cross. I think I left my phone in the cafe. But when I got on the train, I was like, should I go back and get the phone? The problem is if I'd gone back and got the phone, I had a set train. So if I'd gone back and got the phone, I would have missed the train. I'd have had to pay out another 100 odd quid to get back. So I just left it because I thought, I know that sounds crazy, but I thought I'm going to buy a new phone at some point anyway, because this phone is kind of falling apart. The port was a bit damaged and I'd already got it repaired before and paid money to get it repaired before. And I thought, I'm not going to do this again. I'm not going to get it repaired again. It's just costing too much. I might as well just buy a new phone at that point. But anyway, so I played Jonathan Underwood in last round. And I was on 4 out of 4 at that point. So I was half point clear of Jonathan. And I was a point clear of everyone else. So I knew a draw was guaranteeing me the prize money. Was guaranteeing me the first prize, which is £1,000. It's a lot of money, right? That's more. That's a bigger prize than I probably won in a tournament for years. Or one of the biggest prizes I've won in a tournament for years. In any tournament. So I figured, if I offered Jonathan a quick draw, because he's 900, he's probably going to accept, with all due respect to him, because he's also has to factor in the fact that if he probably doesn't need the money, let's be honest, but he probably has to factor in the fact that if he draws, he could potentially win some prize money, and also there was a prize for best West, I think it's West Country chess player. So there's also a trophy for that. So he would have at least tied for first for that. In fact, I think he would have won it outright. So you have to factor in these into the equation. So after the draw, he was kind enough to accept. So the game was a very quick draw. But obviously, if I played and won, I wouldn't have won any extra prize money. It wasn't FIDE rated. It was a big drop, potentially. I worked out if there had been a few decisive results. If I'd have lost, I could potentially have only won about 130 quid, which would have been about an £870 drop. So it's a big drop with no upside if you win the game financially. So unfortunately, you've got to think about these considerations. But yeah, obviously overall it was a successful event. But yeah, I asked Jonathan after the game what his game in the previous round was like. Because when I was playing in round 4, I was playing against quite a tough opponent myself, Siraj. On board 2, it was Indy Southcott Moyes was playing against Cameron Go, is it, from Cambridge University. And I thought there's quite a high possibility that game might end in a draw because Indy is very solid, quite a good defensive player, but when he needs to win game, this is a game that way it's slightly different because he needs to win the game. He's white and he's like the favourite, rating favourite. So I wasn't so sure like what he'd be like in that situation. And as it turned out, that game was a draw. So I thought there was quite a high possibility I would play the winner if the game was decisive on board 3, and that's how it turned out. But Jonathan told me that this game was the best game that he'd ever played and involved a queen sacrifice. So let's have a look at the game. So Jonathan was black. So let's look at it from his perspective. He plays a Sicilian defence, knight c6, d3. Slightly, yeah, I mean, already maybe white should think about playing d4 because he's a younger player. He should use that kind of energy to go into an open Sicilian. A lot of players are afraid of going into the open Sicilian. If I was giving advice to Billy Fellows, I'd say you're going to become a better player if you learn the open Sicilian as white than if you play these avoidance systems. I always think that's bad advice to juniors, you know, play all these kind of anti-Sicilians because you're scared of the theory. That's how you learn, that's how you get better at chess. One of the things I noticed about Billy Fellows is he's quite a sort of raw talent. I think he could be a very good player, but he's not got much experience. I played him in Scarborough about a year and a half ago, and I thought he's quite a good player. And he's part of like a good generation of players that we've got coming through now, like who play a lot as well. Stanley Badasconi, who was playing in Bristol at the same time, Supratit Banerjee, Bodhana, Zain Patel, there's also Jude Shearsby as well. Similar kind of ages of these players, and they're all kind of young and ambitious. So yeah, I would say go D4 because D3, it's okay, but it's a bit timid. And you get a kind of what's it called? Reverse King's Indian, I guess, to some extent. I mean, first I would say move E5 looks a little bit dubious to me to allow the queen in the centre, but that ends up paying off for black. I mean, I might have been tempted with knight F6. Then I guess white would simply just castle, and you might get a position like this, which is probably some kind of theory like rook e1. I haven't analysed this with an engine. Obviously, Jonathan sent me the PGA, sent me the game. I don't think he analysed it with an engine either. We could look at it with an engine. This is still theory, but e5 there is not theory, because obviously you're now allowing the queen into the centre, which looks dubious for black. So castles, maybe setting up this threat. Yeah, so that blocks the threat now because knight e5 can be met with queen e5. So if black played something like this, then I imagine knight takes e5 is very much a move that white would consider and probably almost certainly play, because here is fouling to rook e1 and the queen is pinned against the king. So going back, yeah, knight e7, I would give that move an exclamation mark. However, it still feels like black is under a little bit of pressure. What options does white have here? What did white play? White played rook e1. That does look like a normal move, and black simply retreated. Another move that white maybe could have considered playing was knight g5 immediately, possibly to try and put the knight on e4. Were there any other options? Knight b3 might be an option. Knight e4 is an option. Lots of options, right? Knight e4. How do you defend against the threat of c4 simply winning the pawn? There's also an idea of maybe going bishop g5 and then trying to go knight f6 check and winning the bishop pair. I'd have been a little bit afraid, if I was black, I'd have been a little bit afraid of that move, I must admit. Because I'm also seeing that if you go here, try to, you know, hope, well, possibly take, well, takes the knight's saying. But I think there's a knight d2, and then black is going to win material, because if you take, then I have knight f6 check. Admittedly, maybe black could consider giving up the, well, it has to, it's not consider, you have to, no, but I don't think this is very good, is it? For several reasons, like knight e4 is a good move there. Queen f3 might be good. I don't think this is going to work. So, white's too active. So, yeah, that's something to consider. Maybe knight e4 was a miss by white. It feels like black's position is a bit suspicious, to be honest. Because if you castle, maybe I can simply crudely win a pawn with c4 and then take on c5 and be a pawn up. So around about this point, I think white is better. But obviously that's normal in chess games. You're going to get moments in the game, even if you play a good game, where your opponent is doing well. But yeah, so rook e1 also looks natural. Very natural move. Queen d7. Which is a good move because I think at this point knight e5 was becoming a threat. So white went knight e4. Again, that looks like a good move. Yeah. A bishop g5. This looks very natural. Yeah, because now the threat of knight f6. So at this point in the game, looks like white is bossing the game. but it turns around quite dramatically, as we will see. I mean, there are other moves. Maybe you could consider me like c3, just going for like d4 later, or maybe c3, a3, b4. But if black gets time, they will castle and play f5 and push the knight away. Maybe even play f5 immediately. So white plays bishop g5, but that looks like the most natural move. Queen e6 all looks a bit shaky for black. Understandably, white decided that, you know, when you got a temporary advantage in this case, which is that white is ahead in development, they've already castled. The black queen has had to move on several times already. It's gone from d5 back to d7, gone to e6. So it's played 1, 2, 3 moves already with a queen. You feel like you want to exploit that. So white, yeah, actually I don't like that move particularly because it feels like, well, okay, maybe it's just tactically good. I think white played that because he thought that it was just tactically strong. Was d4 immediately possible? Was that an option for white? I mean, okay, I don't know, but if you take, but actually maybe cd is just good, right? Because I don't think that like knight d4 is working, and maybe b4 is a possibility, but that feels a bit random. Not sure I love it. Feels a bit slow, right? So what other options? White could have just simply gone c3 maybe, but then of course black will then gain time on a bishop either with f6 or h6. Maybe just castle, actually probably would have just castled. Maybe a move like d4 is working, but yeah, the other possibility is that black will simply play h6 and then gain time on a bishop. So white decided to take, black took, and this is where white, oh, it went knight c3, yeah, that's, yeah, again, very natural move actually. Yeah, so you're kind of like hinting at the idea knight e5. So black decided to play bishop b7, but now black is probably doing okay-ish. If you don't have a knockout blow immediately, it might well be that black is consolidating. Castle's queenside. This is the problem with me like bishop e7. It's risky strategically. If it doesn't pay off, then you might end up in a worse position because black has a space advantage. Because it's very kind of, you know, it's actually a very ambitious line by black because they're trying to gain space. Normally white has a space advantage in the opening, in most openings, but in this particular position it looks like black has a space advantage. But yeah, so here white needs to play very directly, possibly. What did he decide to play? He played knight d5. Again, move like d4 I don't think is very good here because you're running into stuff like this. Probably just takes is also good. So knight d5, queen d7. So this is when the fireworks happened. So again, you know, there's no need to go gung-ho. Could white just simply play me like c4? And say, look, okay, maybe this position isn't as good as it was a few moves ago, but I'm still doing okay. I think that's the thing with chess, is that sometimes you can let your ego run away with you. And rather than just sitting there and saying, look, people try too much, basically, is the point I'm trying to say. You know, they try to do too much. When they've lost the advantage, there's often a danger zone. When you've lost the advantage, you then try to make up for the losing advantage by pushing too hard. So maybe this is what happened over the next few moves, because it seemed like white ended up in a bad position. Yeah, I'm not massively in love with c4, I'll be honest. From white's perspective, I mean, white has a great position. Black could simply just cast. Probably going to castle kingside now. Could also consider casting queenside as well. Both moves look playable. But I'd probably be reluctant to allow something like a3 and b4. Whereas if I castle kingside, I feel like, yeah, I mean, you've got b4, but maybe it's less destructive if if I'm fairly solid on the king's side. Maybe like rook e8 I would consider. But then b4, I guess. Maybe there is the idea of winning the exchange, but yeah, white would end up with very dangerous position then, because knight f6 was coming. So this is where it all started getting crazy. So white went d4, black took. So clearly, to justify the sacrifice, you have to take on e5, because otherwise your position is, well, I suspect you probably have to take on. I don't really see any other ideas other than maybe knight g5, which looks very slow. So white decided to take, and this is where Jonathan came up with this amazing conception of taking on g2. In fact, this actually reminds me of a game that I had myself as black against Paul Byway years ago. It was about 30 years ago in the 4NCL, and we played a 4NCL in Wales somewhere. I forget where exactly. It was something like Newport or something like that. And I played Paul Byway, who's quite an experienced. I'm not sure if he's still around, but he's quite an experienced player, and quite a lot older than me at the time. I was just like 1995. I'd have been about 19, and I sat my queen to get a sort of blockade position. It wasn't as good a version as this, and I remember the shock when I took on g2. It was very similar kind of setup to this, but not as good a version, because I didn't really have the play that Jonathan has in this game. So I was basically sitting there defending knight and bishop against queen for many, many moves, and he was winning at one point, but failed to see the win and ended up drawing. So that was a memorable game in the early part of my career. Very bad game, but memorable game. So this position, after castles, this already looks tremendous for black. I don't like white's position at all. This has gone wrong. Because we've got 3 pieces for the queen. And so we've got knight and the 2 bishops. And we're also putting huge amount of pressure on the centre, and we're threatening knight f3. So I would already assess this as position as bad for white. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like the mistake came earlier. So let's see what happened anyway. White played rook e3. What else? Because knight f3 was a threat. So when you're faced with a difficult position like white has, you're trying to generate some play. You could dismiss that move because this would be a technically winning position for black, I would assume. Although, yeah, I mean, maybe something like this you could argue is not that easy to win. A computer would probably win this as white. Well, would probably win it from both sides, right? What's the material count? So I do have a pawn for the bishop pair. So I've got rook and a pawn. So yeah, it's not completely lost, but I would say that is clearly better for black. So that was something, if you're really desperate. Obviously, you're very reluctant to get out the queen, right? So he went there, and then white went queen e2. That's a natural move. Played rook d8. This is the problem. Like, rook d8 is a tremendous move. Fairly obvious, but still very strong. So he went rook e1, rook d2, queen b5. Desperately trying to get active, but what else? It already looks very, very suspicious. So I think now this position is lost. So Jonathan, I think the notes mentioned h4 might have been an improvement. Yeah, I think you need to give your kings some hope, but I still think this position looks bad for white. Maybe bishop d4 is a problem, because now I'm threatening this, and when you go here, I could actually go here and then. Oh no, you have check actually. You have check. It changes it. Still not a great position for white, but maybe are you clinging on here? I'm not sure. It starts to become a test of calculation. This moves like bishop g4, allowing rook e7, and then you take on f2. So bishop g4, you could calculate bishop g4. Okay, rook e7. Bishop takes f2. If king h2, yeah, it's tricky, right? maybe king h2 surviving. So yeah, this was another option maybe, but actually there's bishop f2 here. I'm noticing now because after this there's bishop b5 check. So this doesn't work for white. Because if you move the king, then I simply take the rook, and I'm just way too much material ahead. So yeah, I feel like this position's already desperate. Let's just show you how the game finished, because I feel like it was still quite a good hoover up job by black. By the way, Jonathan lives in Seaton, which is it's a very nice coastal. Is it a village or a town? I don't know. But when I looked him up, that's where that was his club. So that's in Dorset. Dorset's a lovely part of the country. One of the things I noticed walking around Bournemouth, there wasn't the normal types of like rubbish and excrement, dog excrement on the floor. People are like more respectful. There is a bit of problem with drugs in that area, homelessness. But let's say that's a problem, but well, it's sad that so many people are living rough. That's true with a lot of English coastal towns now, where there's not necessarily a lot of industry, I would say, not a huge amount. I think Dorset though has got quite a lot of money because a lot of people retire to Dorset. A lot of wealthy people retire because it's such a beautiful part of the world. When I was walking around and I walked to the coastal part of Dorset, anyway, let me just get back to that in a second. I'll just show you how the game finished quickly. It basically just becomes a technical exercise. And he wins the b4 pawn by force. So now this is totally winning because you've got the bishop pair. Even without the b pawn, you could argue this is winning anyway because the rook and two bishops combine so well. I might have even been tempted to put the bishop on e5. If I can get a setup with a bishop on e5, the king on g7, bishop on f6, you cannot make any progress. And then I can win at my leisure. I can put the rook on b2. If I get something like this, just to show, I mean, this is about as bomb-proof as it gets. Put the rook on b2, start pushing the b pawn. In fact, I put the rook on b1. So I push the pawns all the way to b2, and then eventually I'm going to move the rook. So that's like resigns time. They kind of made it a little bit more tricky than it needed to be, I would say, but it still was completely winning. So never any risk that he messed up the win. So he takes the pawn on f2, and yeah, good practical try by Billy, who's quite a tricky player, that he plays g4 just to at least open up some lines and force black to think. So I think, yeah, if black had the king on g7 earlier with a bishop on f6, and even those g4 ideas wouldn't have worked because you can always take with a bishop probably, and then because f7 wouldn't be hanging. So, but this is still completely winning because I'm so much material ahead. And very quickly, white decided to resign the game at this point because there's just no counterplay. So yeah, going back to what I was saying. So I went. There was like a cliff part, a west cliff. That's where the part where I was staying was on the west cliff of Dorset or Bournemouth, and you walked to the edge. And you could see across the bay, and it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And probably even nicer than, say, Torbay, which is also extremely nice, which is a similar part of the world. And you could look across, and there's Beachy Head. I think there's Beachy Head on the horizon, I'm not sure. But Beachy Head is a famous suicide spot because it's so high up that, if you fall off it, that's it, game over. But yeah, so I think a lot of wealthy people retire to Dorset because it's such a nice part of the world. So there is a little bit of money in Dorset, but obviously they still have the problem with, the drugs, unemployed, and everything that you say it's in Hastings. But it's kind of like a little bit nicer looking than, say, a Hastings because there's a bit more money maybe put into the council and stuff like that. Anyway, that was an interesting game. Leave your comments down below what you thought of the game. Did you think it was interesting that Jonathan said, it might have been recency biased, but he said that was the best game he ever played. So that was an interesting, yeah, rare that you see somebody say that. But as far as playing the tournament is concerned, I did enjoy the tournament. It was a well-run tournament. Uh, the main organizer was a guy called Martin Simons, who I've known for many years. He's been based in this part of the world for a long time, I think, or maybe he's even from Bournemouth. He did a good job with the organisation. He's also a good player himself. He's been player in British Championship. I think I played him before, and he's skillful player. He's like over 2100, so he could have played in the tournament himself. But he's the organiser. There's also a guy called John Constable was the main organiser. He organised a lot of these tournaments. The main arbiter, sorry, but he's an arbiter for a lot of these tournaments. When I played in Torbay, he was the arbiter for that tournament. But yeah, overall, I enjoyed the experience. It's a lot of expense. So I played Bolton and Bournemouth last 2 weekends. I managed to win both, which was great. Yeah, I thought I might win one out of two. I thought possibly I would win Manchester Rapid play or come equal first with Bogdan or something like that, because I'm quite good at Rapid. And I thought I might come up short at Bournemouth because you got Craig Hannay was like the top seed. But Craig lost in round 2 to this dangerous player Siraj. So he came up short. Let's actually have a look and see what the computer says. But fair play to Craig. So I've got enabled computer analysis. Let's have a look, see if there were any missed chances by either player. And what the accuracy level was. I reckon Black's accuracy level was well into the 90s, probably something like 93 or 94, and White was probably maybe low 90s or high 80s is my guess, but that's just a guess. I mean, I felt like it was a fairly accurate game, actually. It wasn't like a blunderfest. It was just that one key moment. Yeah, so Manchester Rapid player managed to win with 5.5 out of 6, and this I managed to win with 4.5 out of 5, so I was pretty chuffed about that. But yeah, that's what you want. So yeah, actually Jonathan's actually was very high. That's like GM level, 97%. Probably the inaccuracies happened early in the game. Billy Fellows, yeah, low. So there were possibly a couple of mistakes. Let's go back right to the start. So E5 doesn't love. Yeah, so at this point, I did mention actually, was 94 maybe a move there? What would Black played? Actually, B6 is okay for Black. So I'm talking nonsense. So Rook E1 was correct. Knight E4 looks more or less correct, right? Bishop G5 was also correct. So this is where you play the amazing move B4. Yeah, computer very good at finding these kind of weird pawn stabs. I didn't see B4 in the analysis, did I? Maybe if I spent a bit more time, I might have considered that. So I think the main idea is to try and distract this knight from this diagonal, which suddenly the bishop becomes more potent on this diagonal. If you take with a pawn, the obvious move would then be D4, I guess. So the computer's giving H6 as best, and then White's better. But the question is, what would happen if you take with a pawn? I think D4 is fairly obvious then. That's the problem. And that's creating tactical problems for Black. Is that right? What does it say? Yeah. Yeah, so that's because this didn't work before because of C takes D4. But now if you go B4, now if you take with a knight, I guess maybe D4 anyway is the problem, right? D4 is nasty. Wow. So B4, a brilliant idea by the computer. That's a lovely idea, I must admit. But it wasn't found by White, unfortunately. Understandably, I wouldn't find B4. I didn't find B4 in analysis. I was also considering let's say you play a normal move, you got C3. Yeah, I think that would have been my choice, C3, just to say, look, I don't love my position as White because I don't see an amazing breakthrough, but I think it's solid and there's no need to panic. F5 I think is too loosening. Yeah, it's too loosening in this position. It's just bad. There's all these tactics like knight e5 as well. So another option here, sorry, is to go instead of also to take here. This is just a good position for white. Like knight e5 and then f4 is just crunch 1-0, right? But again, not obvious. Not obvious. But I suppose, yeah, there's sort of ideas. It's not so obvious that this is so strong. Because you think, well, black can castle. But the problem is castle, the computer will just say crudely take. You can't take with a queen because of knight f6. Yeah, I think it would be a mistake to sort of cash in here and try and win the rook. Because you're giving up too many minor pieces. So what you do is you simply take. Now you've got these same threats. Much stronger. The threat is strong in the execution. If you take the queen, now I win the queen. If you take with a bishop, I'm probably still going to go knight f6 check. Yeah, so this is just bad. So that would have been another beautiful win. So there are two beautiful wins here with knight e5 and b4. But white took, that was quite a big mistake. That's what I said. It felt wrong. You know, some moves just feel wrong, and but he did it with a concrete idea in mind, but somehow it didn't work out. Now this no longer looks good for white. Yeah, so I suggested c4 and then a3. Yeah, this looks more standard. I think white still has quite a good game, but d4 would have been. Yeah, that's quite a big mistake because this queen sacrifice is looking good for white. And yeah, so the best try actually was to do this, but that's hard to commit to because you know you're worse. And I think I would have tried that though, because the position if you keep the queens on is so depressing for white. Normally you think, well, actually keep the queens on to get the counter play, but it seems like it's too easy for black. So if you take, you know, with a rooks, I've got some hope maybe. And then he has to find this complex idea of bringing a bishop round to g4. Yeah, if you don't get the bishop there, then there's always a danger that white will go e6 later to open a position up. Might get the rooks to the seventh rank. But this is actually a very clever idea that you bring the bishop round here and then you stabilise. And then, yeah, black's a load better, just winning actually. But practically would have been more difficult for white, I think. But yeah, once he goes here, and this just feels too easy for black, and I think after this there was really not much to talk about. As Jonathan suggested, it was all fairly simple stuff, and there wasn't much that white could do really. But yeah, I mean, amazing conception by black. But he's kind of forced into this queen sacrifice, I think. So I think in regret, maybe white regretted doing that, forcing black into this good idea. And yeah, I suggested in this position, I think the way Jonathan played it was correct, but I suggested something like this was good, and then put the king there and then just gradually push the pawn was another winning plan, rather than going after the f pawn, which you don't really need, to be honest. You don't need the f pawn here, and that would have just been a very simple win without any risk whatsoever. To be honest, you'd resign really on a human level here. But yeah, so that was a good. Thank you, Jonathan, for sending me that game. Guys, please send me your games, because I'm always looking out for games of people. It's always nice when people send me their games. But yeah, that was Billy Fellows versus Jonathan Underwood from the Bournemouth Grand Chess Congress in round 4, which would have taken place on the Sunday morning.